Star Wars The Mandalorian Season 1 takes place 5 years after Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi and is created by Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni.
Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. Don't you agree?
What's going on, everybody? Martino here from Extract Media, and today I am still prepping for The Mandalorian Season 3. I'm going through all the live action series I have not yet reviewed on this channel. So The Mandalorian Season 1 was a big deal when it was coming out because it was Star Wars on TV that wasn't animated, and I don't want to undermine that feeling at the time that we all had because it was all very exciting to see. I was a big fan of both Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni prior to the series' release, so the two of them working together was just an exciting prospect. This series also underwent a lot of pressure upon its release because it was what was launching the Disney Plus streaming service. The season's also broken up into 8 chapters, which we'll go through now. Also, guys, I'm not going to try to refrain from spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen The Mandalorian Season 1 yet, I do recommend you tune out now, but if you just don't care and you want to hear my spoiler thoughts before you check it out, just go ahead and stick around for the review. So Chapter 1, the very first episode, is directed by Dave Filoni, and this sets up that Mandalorian is a bounty hunter who ends up meeting this guy named Quill along his bounty, who's played by Nick Nolte. The Mandalorian is played by the great Pedro Pascal, who I was also a fan of before this series from Game of Thrones, and I couldn't wait to see what he would do in something like Star Wars. And he is so freaking great as this character. Even in this first episode, I noticed that he just brings so much to the voice of it, and he really makes this character iconic straight from the get-go. So on Mandalorian's journey to collect this bounty, Quill gives him a creature called a blurg to ride on to help him through his journey. His ship kind of crashes in Quill's area, so he does need something to ride to complete his bounty. I thought this episode had very great action, especially when Mando jumps on the turret. That scene is freaking awesome. It has a lot of visual cues that very much mimic the original trilogy that I really love seeing here. On the way, Mando meets a droid named IG-88, voiced by the great Taika Waititi, who's also a director on one of the episodes of the season. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But they get to their bounty, and Mandalorian realizes this is a child, and this is a huge reveal to the audience because this is the same species as Yoda, which we've never seen before outside of Yoda, so it was a huge deal when we saw this. And this ending still really plays now. Honestly, it really does make you want to keep watching more. And once Mandalorian figures out that IG-88 is sent to kill this child and programmed to kill the child, and he really doesn't have a choice, Mandalorian shoots him down and doesn't let him do it. It's a good pilot, but I don't know that it's enough to really let you know if the rest of the series is going to be good or not, but it definitely gives some intriguing ideas that make you want to keep going. Like I said, luckily it did make me keep going through the show. And of course, Chapter 2 is called The Child. It's directed by Rick Famuyiwa, who I wasn't familiar with before watching this, but I'd heard of him through reputation. I heard he was a very good director, so I was very curious to see what he was doing here, and he made a super fun episode. This episode's almost flawlessly directed. I thought Rick Famuyiwa did a fantastic job. In this episode, Mandalorian gets ripped off by these Jawas who basically take his stuff. He goes back to Quill, and Mando and Quill basically cut a deal with the Jawas. This episode has a lot of really fun Star Wars action, I must say, that really impressed me. It definitely mimicked the style of the original trilogy once again. Mando ends up having to get this egg from this creature for these Jawas in order to get his stuff back. He pretty much loses the fight to the creature right as he's about to die. There's another big reveal as the creature starts floating in the air and he realizes the child's doing it, revealing that the child does indeed have the Force, which is another really intriguing idea. I like at this point the series just gives you little by little each episode to just kind of keep it going. I think it just does a good job giving you just the right amount of intrigue, you know. Chapter 3 is called The Sin, and this one's directed by Deborah Chow, who would later go on to direct the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. This is her first experience with Star Wars. I wasn't familiar with her as a director at all, but I'm happy to say that at this point this is the best episode in the series so far. She did a fantastic job with this one. I actually think it's amazing. So Mando returns the child to the person who gave him the bounty, who's played by Werner Herzog, by the way, who I think is just a fantastic, intimidating presence in the show. Very eccentric in all of the right ways, honestly. It's him and this doctor, Dr. Pershing, that gave him the bounty. Mando turns in the bounty, and I like that this episode really shows that Mando takes the Beskar that he receives in the bounty. He takes this back to the armorer, who then upgrades his armor for him, which is really fantastic. It's almost like a video game. You go, you do the mission, you collect some stuff, and then you get some upgrades. That's kind of how the show plays in a way. Mando's just talking to Greef Karga about what they're going to do with the child. Greef Karga is played by Carl Weathers. He basically does give him the tips for the bounties. Once Mando realizes that they're going to conduct these very strange and mysterious experiments on the child, Mando's heart just gets the better of him, and then he goes back and saves the child, and he basically causes a ruckus throughout this whole town. I like that the show really sets up the galaxy post the Empire. There are still people around, like stormtroopers, for example, guarding these experiments, and these people still clearly believe in the Empire, which I kind of dig. There's great action with Mando and the stormtroopers, though. He takes out a lot of them in this episode in some very cool ways. We get introduced to, I think they called them the Firefly things or something. They're on his wrists and they like fly around and they take out multiple stormtroopers at once. It's super badass. The action is so well shot. It feels like very cool Star Wars action, but Greef Karga also has beef with Mando now because he's the one that gave him the tip for the bounty, and I found this friction to be very compelling here. Mando has a lot of fellow Mandalorians, though, who were mad at him, kind of, but they're all in this planet called Navarra, and they do help him get away. They distract him long enough. They also kind of cause a ruckus, and Mando takes off in the ship with the child, and he escapes. Chapter 4, called Sanctuary, is directed by Bryce Dallas Howard. Yes, this is Bryce Dallas Howard, the great Ron Howard's daughter. I was a fan of her as an actress before this, but I was really curious to see what she could bring as a director. This is a really fascinating thing for me because I'm a huge fan of Ron Howard too, and I knew it was definitely in her genes. I mean, I hope that directing thing is hereditary, right? I'm happy to say this is a very well directed episode. I thought Bryce did a very great job with this one. Mando basically goes and hides out in a village where he ends up meeting this shock trooper named Cara Dune, and the village is kind of getting disrupted by this AT-AT, which they tell Mando about, and he recruits Cara Dune to help him out. Cara Dune is played by Gina Carano, and I think Gina Carano does very well in this series. It's the best acting I've ever seen her do. It's not like an amazing performance, but it's really good for this character, and she embodies the character very well. I know that she's no longer going to be in the show, and I think that's kind of a bummer, controversy aside, because I really do like the character and the performance that she provides for it. But Cara and Mando do agree to just show the town how to defend themselves, and they're going to help them out with that. So it really is a Seven Samurai episode. In this episode, Mando also meets a woman. We get a lot more revealed about him, and he cannot take off his helmet in front of people. It's kind of a part of the creed of the Mandalorian. Speaking of which, "This is the way" is such a great line. It was so catchy. I remember like everybody was saying it after this show aired. But yeah, this has really fun action in it. It's a really well directed episode, but then Mando realizes that this town is a threat as a bounty hunter comes to look for the child. He was going to leave the child there, but then he's like, we gotta go. We cannot stay here. Chapter 5 is called The Gunslinger. This is once again directed by Dave Filoni, and this really shows that Dave Filoni has a lot to learn when directing live action, at least by the time he was doing this episode, because he's typically great for Star Wars animation, but this is his first foray into the live action. I definitely think this is the weakest episode of the series. I mean, Mando goes to Tatooine to fuel up and get some maintenance on his ship, the Razor Crest. He meets Peli Motto, who he leaves the child with as he goes into the cantina, which the cantina is pretty cool because it's the same one that Han Solo met Luke Skywalker in, which I thought was a really cool callback, and they redesigned it very well for the series. This bounty hunter, played by Jake Carnivale, that Mando beats in the cantina, basically recruits Mando to help him on his first job to go get another bounty hunter named Fennec Shand, who has a bounty on her. Fennec Shand is played by Ming-Na Wen, and she becomes a much more important character later on, but not in this season. I did like seeing speeder bikes in this episode, but some of the shots I thought just looked incredibly cheap. I don't know if it was the way Filoni shot it or if it was just too reliant on the volume stage of the CGI to try to create Tatooine in these moments. All in all, they do end up capturing Fennec Shand, but then Mando goes back to collect the speeder bikes, I believe, but then Fennec talks the bounty hunter into getting Mandalorian because he has a bounty on his head too, but instead the bounty hunter ends up shooting Fennec, but then goes after Mando, and at the end Mando just ends up shooting this bounty hunter. Really didn't think Jake Carnivale was a very good actor in this episode. I didn't think a lot of the writing worked very well. Peli Motto, played by Amy Sedaris, also just had very cheesy writing in this episode. I don't know what was up with it, but this one just fell off of all the episodes in the series. But of course, Mando takes off at the end of the episode, then it's on to the next one. Chapter 6 is called Prisoner. It's directed by Rick Famuyiwa once again. It's definitely a fun episode where Mando goes and sees an old friend that he used to do some missions with for sure. They kind of set that up here in a big way, but then this guy sets him up with the crew to do a job so he can gain some cash. The job goes awry very fast as soon as Mando figures out who they're going after, which is this very dangerous guy. By the way, out of this whole team, Bill Burr as Mayfeld is such a great character. He brings so much to the screen. I was so impressed with his performance in this episode. I just thought he did a fantastic job. He brings humor and intensity in a very natural way that I thought just really fit the episode, and it's a character I really like till this day. I love the scene where everything goes awry and Mando pretty much goes around this prison taking the group out pretty much one by one, and it becomes a horror movie because they never know where Mando's at. It's kind of cool. It's a very unique style to add to Star Wars, and I really like this episode for it. Mando goes back to the base where his buddy was at that he met up with, and basically sets up the base to get blown up by the rebellion as he puts a tracker in there. The rebel pilots that show up are played by Dave Filoni, Rick Parmagua, and Deborah Chow, which I thought was very cool. It was cool to see their cameos in here, as all three are series directors this season, and Dave obviously being a co-creator of the show. It was just very cool to see. So the last three episodes were definitely Adventure of the Week, but Chapter 7 really brings everything back around. The episode's called The Reckoning. It's directed by Deborah Chow once again, and it's my favorite episode in the entire series. Everything really does come full circle as Mando recruits Squeal and Cara Dune after Greef Karga gets a hold of him, pretty much gives him a peace offering saying, okay, we'll go to Werner Herzog together and take him out. Mando doesn't trust Greef, and for very good reason here, because Greef does end up admitting that he was going to betray Mando after the child saves him from this big like flying dragon thing that he ends up getting hit by. So then he ends up coming up with a real peace offering this time to actually go in and kill Werner Herzog. Initially, actually, they were going to just set up a diversion, but if everything went wrong, they were just going to kill Werner Herzog and the stormtroopers if they had to. They were pretty much going to give Werner Herzog an empty crib and then try to get out of there, so it seemed. I also like on this team that we do have IG-88 back, voiced by Taika Waititi, as I said, and he is reprogrammed to protect the child, according to Quill, but Mando doesn't trust that. I like the friction here. So basically, Moff Gideon shows up, though, in his TIE fighter with a bunch of stormtroopers, death troopers, the whole 9 yards, and he is played by Giancarlo Esposito, and he's clearly the leader of this whole operation with everything going on with the child, whatever they want from it. Moff Gideon's in charge of that. So he pretty much ends up blowing up like Werner Herzog. All the troopers that are in the building, Mando, Cara, and Greef are fine, but Quill, who was supposed to take the child back to the ship, ends up getting shot down by stormtroopers. It's a great cliffhanger they leave us off with, and Giancarlo is great in this episode as he starts to reveal that he really needs the child. Chapter 8 is the finale. It's called Redemption. This one's directed by Taika Waititi, and Taika is one of my favorite directors working today, so I was very happy to see him do this episode. Like I said, he also voices IG-88 in the show, so I thought that was very cool. There's a great sequence of stormtroopers just chatting in the beginning of this episode that's very Taika Waititi. It's very hilarious, but it's also kind of natural, and it feels like it's done in like a Tarantino type of way, which I thought was just really cool to see in Star Wars. But these troopers had the child that they took from Quill, and then IG-88 kind of comes in, takes them down. It's a very cool action sequence, and then IG-88 goes into the town just wrecking everybody. An explosion happens, and then Din Djarin is pretty much injured, and then he has to take his helmet off in front of this droid, which is kind of traumatizing for him, I guess, but the droid heals him, and the droid explains, you're good, you haven't broken your creed, you haven't taken your helmet off in front of a person. I like this dynamic that the droid set up. So the crew pretty much tries to get the child out. They meet up with the armorer in this episode. The armorer tells Mando he needs to take this child and find the Jedi, and the Jedi are going to be his people, and they will do the right thing with the child. But the armorer kind of distracts these stormtroopers so they can all escape, and she gets some amazing action in here. She actually shatters one of the stormtroopers' helmets. I've never seen that in Star Wars before. I thought it was amazing. This is a great action sequence directed by Taika. They kind of go out in this lava area on this like little canoe thing, and IG-88 realizes that there's no way they're going to get past these stormtroopers, so he ends up self-destructing, and it's really emotional the way that Mando is around here. He knows this droid saved his life. He knows this droid will protect the child. He does not want this droid to go. It's a very cool dynamic. It's very cool how it's switched from Mando just hating this droid to now being very emotional about this droid's death, but he does blow himself up so the stormtroopers can die and they can get themselves the heck out of there. Mando has this amazing final showdown here. He ends up using his jetpack to get up on this TIE fighter that Moff Gideon's flying, and he puts a grenade on it. It's really, really well done. It's a very great action sequence. The TIE fighter blows up, and then Mando tells Greef and Cara that he's going to take off. Cara basically says she's going to stay on Navarro for a while with Greef. Mando takes off with the child. He says he's going to go find some Mandalorian, and hopefully they can set up a network to help him get to a Jedi, which I thought was very cool. Also in this episode, we did learn that his name was Din Djarin. I forgot to mention that. Brief Karga, he does get out of the TIE fighter at the end, revealing he has the Darksaber. And if you know anything about Mandalorian lore, you know that the person who holds the Darksaber can pretty much rule Mandalore, so this is a great cliffhanger as well. One of the things that just complements this season all the more is Ludwig Göransson's score. I love his theme so much, but one I loved especially was in the village when Mando was talking to this woman who I think he's going to end up falling in love with by the end of the series. I think he's going to go back to the village and find her. Just a theory, but I thought he just added such a sweet score in those moments to really build that. But his score throughout the show is very unique to Star Wars, and it just really works so well. I think this is a fantastic season of television. I think the first live action Star Wars series really freaking worked. There are some issues, like I said, but it really captured the Star Wars feel and had a great balance between that sort of adventure of the week style and also just having this overarching story that kept you very motivated to keep watching. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and give Mandalorian season 1 a must watch. This is such a great show. I do recommend it 100%. Guys, like I said, I'm going through all the live action series I haven't reviewed on the channel yet to get to season 3 of The Mandalorian. I'm very excited about this. I hope you guys continue to join me on this journey, and before I get out of here, please do us a favor, hit that like button below, subscribe to the channel, leave some feedback in the comment section, share this with your friends, and hit the bell for notifications. That's always much appreciated. Once again, I'm Don Martino, and I will talk to you guys later.